Okay, just picture this for a second. You've got a sitting head of state, a president, captured by a foreign military, not on some battlefield, but in his own capital city. Then he's flown to their country to stand trial. We're going to break down this geopolitical bombshell, an event that sent shockwaves all around the globe. And believe me, the implications are just massive.
I mean, it seriously sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie, right? But on January 3rd, 2026, this became the reality for Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. So in this explainer, we're going to walk you through exactly how it all happened, why the White House says they did it, and then we're going to try to unpack the really dangerous questions this raises for, well, the entire world.
All right, so first things first, how did an operation this unprecedented actually go down? Well, this was a mission that had been in the planning stages for months, and it was codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve.
The operation itself was just incredibly fast. I mean, look at this timeline. President Trump gives the green light late on January 2nd. Then, in a window of just a few hours, elite U.S. Special Forces are on the ground in Caracas. And by 3:29 a.m., that's barely 2.5 hours later, they were already leaving Venezuelan airspace with Maduro in custody. Just wow.
Now, here's what's really mind-blowing. To make that timeline even possible, it took a staggering amount of firepower. We're talking about over 150 military aircraft. This wasn't some small, sneaky team. This was a massive, coordinated military action designed to completely overwhelm any possible resistance.
And this slide really shows you just how complex it was. You had the U.S. establishing total air dominance with its absolute best fighter jets, F-22s, F-35s. But at the exact same time, U.S. Space Force and Cyber Command completely blinding Venezuela's air defense systems, which, by the way, were supplied by Russia. This created a totally safe corridor for the special ops helicopters to fly in and out. The result? A tactical home run, Maduro captured, and 0 U.S. casualties reported.
So, that brings us to the really big question, why? Why do this at all? Let's dive into the official justification that the Trump administration gave for taking such a radical, drastic step.
In his announcement, President Trump himself framed the whole operation in these very stark terms. This was about more than just one guy. It was a deliberate choice. It was meant to send a loud and clear message of American strength and resolve to the rest of the world, basically signaling a much more aggressive foreign policy.
The administration then laid out its case with a bunch of interconnected reasons. They pointed back to a 2020 indictment against Maduro for, quote, narco-terrorism. So they framed the raid as a kind of law enforcement action. But they also talked about creating a stable transition in Venezuela and, this is key, reasserting U.S. influence in its own backyard.
And all of that ties into this bigger strategy, something analysts have started calling the Trump corollary. You can think of it as a 21st century reboot of the old Monroe Doctrine. The whole point is to stop powers like China and Russia from getting too cozy in Latin America. In this raid on Venezuela, it was the first major real-world test of that policy.
But as you can imagine, the operation was met almost immediately with just widespread international condemnation. Critics are arguing it may have set an incredibly dangerous precedent for the future.
And this table really gets to the heart of the backlash. You have two totally competing stories. Where the U.S. saw necessary law enforcement action against a narco-terrorist, much of the rest of the world, including the United Nations, saw a blatant violation of the UN Charter. They saw it as a threat to the very idea of state sovereignty and an unlawful use of force.
The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, he did not mince words. He stated that the action was a dangerous precedent and flat out said that the core rules of international law had been broken.
And Kenneth Roth from Princeton, he really sharpens the point on that fear. The big concern here is that if one country can just decide to invade another to remove a leader it doesn't like, what's to stop other major world powers from doing the exact same thing to advance their own interests? It's a slippery slope.
So, this raises a really fascinating legal puzzle. If the act of capturing Maduro was illegal under international law, how in the world can a U.S. court legally put him on trial?
Well, the answer lies in this pretty controversial U.S. legal principle called the Kerr-Frisbee Doctrine. And what it says is essentially the court doesn't care how a defendant got into the courtroom. Even if they were abducted illegally, the court says, hey, you're here now, so we have jurisdiction to try you. This is the exact same doctrine that was used to prosecute the Panamanian leader Manuel Noriega after the U.S. invasion way back in 1989.
Okay, so with Maduro gone and facing trial in the U.S., the focus now shifts to the future of Venezuela itself. a country that is just sitting on a knife's edge. And to really understand the stakes, you have to get this central paradox. Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world. That's more than Saudi Arabia. But after years and years of total mismanagement, its actual production has completely collapsed. The potential for wealth there is absolutely immense, but so is the potential for total chaos.
And this brings us to that famous, or maybe infamous, Pottery Barn rule of foreign policy. The idea is, you break it, you own it. By removing Maduro, the U.S. now has a pretty significant responsibility for whatever happens next in Venezuela.
So what could happen next? Well, experts are basically looking at three broad scenarios. The best-case scenario is a pretty smooth U.S.-managed transition to new elections. A much more dangerous path, though, is internal conflict, where all these different armed groups, Maduro loyalists, criminal gangs, start fighting for control in a power vacuum. And then there's the worst-case scenario, a protracted quagmire pulling the U.S. into a long, messy, and costly occupation.
And this really leaves us with the central question that's going to define this whole operation for years to come. Was this a decisive action that brought a dangerous leader to justice and paved the way for a more stable future? Or did the U.S. just trade one crisis for another, creating a brand new and totally unpredictable quagmire right in its own backyard? The answer is going to shape the future of an entire region.